You have legal questions. Amy the attorney has the answers. Welcome to today's show. And here's Amy.
Hello, Kansas City. I am here with Jarrett Johnson today. He is an excellent attorney. We are going to be talking to him about car wrecks and when you're injured in a car wreck or a car accident. I have known Jarrett since I was a young prosecutor and he was a public defender. He is a vigorous advocate for his clients. I am very excited to have him on the show. He is smart, he is hardworking, he is compassionate. So welcome, Jarrett.
Thank you very much, Amy. I appreciate you having me on.
Okay, so we are going to cut right to the meat of what we're going to be talking about today. And it's basically when somebody is in a car wreck and they're injured. And obviously serious stuff and could be detrimental and probably is detrimental to this person's life. And they want to get some answers about the next steps they should take with an attorney. And I guess first thing I'm going to ask you is, when should someone consider getting an attorney or a lawyer after a car wreck or a car accident?
It sounds self-serving, but it's important to get an attorney right away, unless it's a really minor accident. The reason for that is right out of the gate. Sometimes, even if you're seriously injured and in the hospital, the insurance company's claims adjuster or investigator is clamoring to get a statement out of you. And that statement is recorded. It's usually done kind of in short shrift on the telephone, and their goal is to minimize the amount of money that they will ever have to pay you. And so they might ask you leading questions that sound pretty harmless when you answer them, but it will come back to bite you later. And so if you've been legitimately injured in an accident, it's important to get an advocate on your side, somebody who is a go-between, somebody who can be with you on the phone or in person when that first interview takes place. And then from that point forward, be your advocate. And your advocate means not only talking to the claims adjuster on your behalf, but also helping guide you through the process. And we'll talk more about that, I'm sure.
Okay. All right. That brings up two questions. One of the things you said was legitimately injured. Tell me what you're talking about when you say that. And, and people can get in all kinds of motor vehicle accidents, car accidents, and it can be from minor injuries to dramatic. But when you say legitimate, I want to hear what you mean by that.
Well, I was in an accident about 2 years ago with my oldest son. We were parked at a light. Our light turned green, and somebody smashed us at a high rate of speed. And after the initial shock of the accident is over, you can immediately tell whether there's something wrong, more often than not. But in the days that follow, you know your own body, and you know whether something hurts or something doesn't hurt. And so if you just have property damage and not much else, I wouldn't advise getting a lawyer involved, because that's just one more person sort of muddying up the works. But within a pretty short time, sometimes immediately after the accident, but definitely by the next morning, you will know your own body enough to know if you've been hurt. And so it's important when you're at the scene of an accident, if officers come to the scene and ask you if you're okay, it's good to say, I don't know yet. I'll take care of myself, if you don't need an ambulance right away. So I guess the reason why I use the term legitimate is I think it's important for us to separate people who really have been harmed by somebody else's carelessness versus the type of person that makes everybody hate lawsuits and hate lawyers. I think it's important to distinguish between those two things.
If somebody has talked to a car insurance adjuster, does that mean that their case is over, or can they still go to an attorney?
Oh, they can certainly still consult an attorney, and they should.
Okay.
And frequently, I would say at least half or more of the clients who come to me have already given a preliminary statement to a claims adjuster. But I'm a good lawyer, and I'm good at pointing out all of the ways that an insurance adjuster's questions don't necessarily effectively get all of the information out of my clients. And as I mentioned at the outset, most of those interviews are done pretty quickly by somebody who just wants to clear your file off their plate. I am pretty good at pointing out all of the questions that weren't asked, or all of the information that wasn't sufficiently gathered by that person. So all is not lost if you've already given a statement.
Okay, great. Perfect. Okay. Is there a sort of a checklist if somebody is injured in a car accident? If you could give them a checklist of, say, 3 things that they should do besides calling you or another attorney, what they should do after they've been injured in a car accident?
No, it's a great question. And frequently people are so impacted by the shock of what's happened. Either they've been hurt, or somebody in the car with them has been hurt. Maybe they've got a kid in a car seat that they're more worried about than anything else. It's hard to take a deep breath and process information and do the important things up front. But the truth is, you don't have a lawyer there with you when you've been T-boned or hit head on, or you're dealing with airbags deploying, or blood, or kids crying. And so the first thing to do is take a deep breath and sort of assess the situation. If there is somebody with you who is able, have them take photographs of the damage from every angle possible. If there is nobody with you and you're not able to do it yourself, ask law enforcement to do that. Most police officers have cameras in their possession. If they don't, you can give them your phone, but have them take photographs of everything. Second, if the officer at the scene should ask if you're okay. Be as descriptive as you can about your injuries right there on the spot. Don't be the hero and don't deny medical treatment. A lot of people, even people who've been seriously hurt, their first reaction is don't call an ambulance because, number one, that's inconvenient. They don't know what's going to happen to their car or their children or whoever. I have had cases where parents and children have all been put on stretchers and taken to different hospitals. That's traumatic, but that was the right decision in those circumstances. So be honest with people attending to you about what your immediate medical needs are. The third thing to do is to make sure you get all information from the driver who hit you. So name, rank, and serial number, a photo of their driver's license, a photo of their car license plate, a picture of them at the scene. Get some basic information so that there's no question who that other person is, how to find them, get a copy of their insurance information, of course. So if you can't do it, again, make sure the police officer does it all, or somebody with you who's capable does that.
Okay, that's great. I think this goes back to one of the first things we discussed is if those things, that's great. If that is what you can do, as somebody that gets injured. But if those things don't happen, it does not mean that there is not a case and that a lawyer cannot advocate for you. It's just that would be sort of like an ideal situation, but there's ideal situations in everything in the law. And it's generally the ideal situation is not what happened. So it does not matter if those things don't happen, they're still going to be able to come to you, consult with you, and possibly have you take them on as a client.
That's true. And good lawyers are very resourceful at putting together pieces of a puzzle. And I look at that every time somebody comes in. I try to immediately identify what pieces of the puzzle are missing and how can I get my hands on those pieces. And you'd be surprised. And one of the greatest mystery solvers is cameras that are available at intersections, or you will see witnesses listed in a police report, and you go track those witnesses down and you pay them a visit. And sometimes those witnesses have taken photographs that nobody would know about it if the lawyer didn't do a little bit of digging. So there's always a way to deal with a puzzle that's missing a few pieces.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so now we're going to get into the stages of this kind of case, kind of take us from A to Z of, car wreck happening, and then Z being either a trial or a settlement, and just kind of what are the stages in between, because then that way people have an idea. And also, if you can give on the back end of that question, how long does this take? How long would this process take? And I know that those factors are variable, but give us an A to Z first, and then I'll ask the other question.
Sure thing. So the problem with all of this is that the way the law is depicted on television, whether it's a criminal case or a civil case, everything is condensed and it seems to happen pretty quickly. And one of my favorite sayings is, do you want it done fast or do you want it done right? And of course, there are extremes, and sometimes things can be handled quickly. But typically, what I tell my clients to do after they've been in an accident and after they have me on board is to just simply, in the short term, take care of themselves. So go see a doctor. Do what that doctor recommends. If the doctor recommends that you go to a neurologist or to an orthopedist, follow that advice. If you don't have health insurance, don't be embarrassed. Talk to me, because there is no shortage of doctors even in the metro area who will see somebody without insurance and provide proper treatment. And then, of course, they'll expect something out of your settlement when it's all over with. But take care of yourself is the first thing. Keep a journal of what your symptoms are. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It doesn't have to be something that you do every single day even, but just periodically make a note of how you are feeling, how much pain you're in on a scale from 1 to 10, what you're not able to do, whether it's picking up your child, getting out of bed in the morning, doing your job, any of those things. Just keep a good record of that, because really lawyers like to think they know everything, but only you know what's going on inside of you. And you are the best historian and the best curator of information. So in the short term, I'm kind of getting a little far afield. After the accident, the first thing is take care of yourself. Find out what's wrong with you, and continue to get treatment. And if you're not getting an answer that satisfies you from your primary care doctor, demand to see a specialist. Make an appointment with a specialist on your own if your insurance allows it. Be vocal about things that are wrong. I can't tell you how many times I've had clients go in and the emergency room, their job is to save your life. So they'll run a CAT scan and that might be negative, for example, or an x-ray might be negative, but you still don't feel right. And your doctor just wants to give you Advil, for example. If you're having numbness, ask for a nerve conduction study. If you're having issues with movement of your joints, ask to go see an orthopedist. So that's the biggest chunk of the aftermath of a car wreck, is my client being their own health advocate with my guidance and getting the treatment that they need so that they find out what's wrong with them and get that fixed. And nothing can happen in the way of money being paid until you have figured out what's wrong with you and you've exhausted your treatment options. You're at what doctors call maximum medical improvement. And that doesn't mean you have to go all the way to surgery. You may decide that, hey, I'm not going to get any better unless I have surgery, and I don't want to have surgery. But you need to run your symptoms and your treatment to ground before you can really get your head around what the value of your case is. So that's the first piece of it, is my clients getting the treatment they need, me getting their medical records, me getting their billing records, me forestalling collection efforts. Because sometimes right out of the gate, people go get emergency room treatment, particularly people without insurance, and they get bills for tens of thousands of dollars in the mail. And I tell my clients, keep track of everything that comes in the mail. Let me see it and let me be your mouthpiece. Let me send a letter to those creditors, to those healthcare providers saying, hey, she's got a lawyer on the case. I promise to take care of you with your bill after the settlement is over. Don't keep harassing her for money. Don't impact this person's credit. Let me be the go-between.
So they come to you, they've signed up as a client, they're taking care of themselves, you're taking care of medical records, you're taking care of debt collectors, people that are coming after them. So then what is the next stage? And they've got their diagnosis. What else are you going to do, and how does the case get moved on?
So the way the case gets moved on is, once I know what's wrong with my client, what treatment they've received, what bills they've incurred, what wages they have lost, how it's impacted them personally. Once I have my head around all of that and I've compiled all of those records, I put everything together and submit a demand to the insurance company. And sometimes it's easy to know what demand to make because the at-fault driver's insurance limits aren't very high. So that makes it easy to send off a letter with all of the supporting documentation and demand policy limits. And then that opens up a different can of worms with things like underinsured motorist coverage. But frequently, there is a dispute over liability, over who caused the accident, or over the comparative levels of fault between the two drivers. Sometimes an insurance adjuster will say, well, your client's 25% at fault. So you can get into these real conflicts about who's at fault, how much they're at fault, how much the insurance company is going to pay. I have a pretty good sense about people, and I have a pretty good sense early on whether I'm going to get a cooperative claims adjuster or somebody that's going to push back and try to fight every battle. If I get that kind of claims adjuster, I just file a lawsuit. And that's me drafting what's called a petition and filing it in state court and getting that case moved from a claims adjuster to a lawyer who represents the insurance company that insures the at-fault driver. So
would your client be doing anything like when you say, okay, you know what, we're moving on. We're not going to deal with this adjuster anymore. We're going to go ahead and file a lawsuit. Would they be notified of that?
Yes, my contracts, they're not very long, but they drive home the point that nothing is done without my client being in the loop. So I have virtual files for my clients. So every time I write a letter and send it to somebody, they get an immediate notification on their phone that I've done something. But nothing gets done. Demands for money are not made without my client's permission. Cases aren't settled without my client's permission. Lawsuits aren't filed. I work with my clients. I'm not the type of lawyer that hides behind the curtain and leaves the clients who've hired me to guess about what's being done. So at every stage, they know what's going on. And the filing of a lawsuit is a big deal because pretty soon we're on the defensive. And the lawyers for the insurance company will hit us with written questions that have to be answered under oath. Some are very prying. They might immediately schedule my client's deposition where they have to sit at a conference table in some strange office and be questioned for hours by a lawyer. So because it's such a big deal and because it impacts my client's life, they know what they're getting into before I jump in.
Okay, I'm going to hone in on court appearances and depositions, two things that you mentioned. How do you get them ready for a deposition or a court appearance? Are you prepping them beforehand?
I do some pretty intensive preparation with my clients before a deposition and certainly before court. Before a deposition, I bring them into my office, and the first thing I do is I just try to get them to relax, and pump them up. And it's not fake pumping up. It's the truth. Like I tell my clients all the time, nobody knows more about what's going on with you than you. Don't let this insurance lawyer who's getting paid $400 an hour try to put words in your mouth or try to tell you that they know better than you what's wrong with you. And so my job in preparation is twofold. One, to boost their confidence, to remind them who's in charge here, and it's my client. And then give them an example, because I've done this for 25 years, give them an example of what they can expect and what questions to watch out for. By the time my clients go in, usually what they say afterwards is, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. And that's because I've taken all the mystique out of it. Right. I mean, there are no shortage of lawyers that will just show up at the deposition with their client, and sometimes they haven't met their client in person prior to the deposition. Like, I just don't roll that way. And then before court, I will show them transcripts of cross-examinations with information redacted, but I will show them what they can expect from cross-examination. And I teach them, we will go into a courtroom. If we can't go into the courtroom where we're having trial, we'll go into a suitable substitute so they can just get comfortable walking from counsel table up to the step and taking the oath and sitting down. These are things that we as lawyers take for granted, but everyday people are intimidated by. And so I try to remove the intimidation that my clients might feel before a deposition or before court.
So how do you determine the worth of a case? When somebody says, how much is my case worth? I want you to talk about not only the medical stuff, but also pain and suffering and what goes into your evaluation of what the case is worth, assuming that you have no insurance limitations.
Okay. So, and sometimes there are no limitations or reasonable limitations when a commercial entity instead of a private person is at fault. Like if a trash truck hits you, you don't have to worry about running out of insurance money. But first of all, I don't talk about money with my clients at the outset. I charge a lower contingency fee if I'm going to resolve things by just writing letters. That goes up a little bit if we have to go to court. But I tell my clients all the time that a case is either worth what a claims adjuster will pay you or what a jury will award you. And both of those things are just very uncertain, and they vary from claims adjuster to claims adjuster. So there is no magic formula. So a lawyer that tells you, oh, you've got this much in medical bills, 5 times that amount, that's how much you're going to get. Anybody who talks money at the very beginning and starts filling your head with expectations, I don't think is doing the right thing. That's my opinion. But the way you value a case, you have to look at a bunch of factors. You have to look at the total medical bills. And even that's confusing. Thanks to changes promulgated by our legislature over the years, juries now know more than they used to. Juries now know how much your initial medical bills were. Like you might go in and have an MRI and the medical bill for that is $10,000. But your insurance company, your health insurance company may have negotiated a rate for $200 for that MRI. Well, guess what? The jury knows about both of those numbers. And so medical bills alone don't do the trick because amounts of medical bills are misleading and don't paint a full picture. The degree to which your quality of life has been impacted is the biggest piece of the puzzle. And there's, I think, 2 halves to that. One is your ability to earn a living. If you do manual labor for a living and you've been injured in such a way where you can't do the job that you've done for 10, 20, or 30 years, that's a big deal. And you have to hire an economist to come in and look at what's called your work-life expectancy, the amount of money you would have earned from the date of the accident until your date of retirement. And and calculate what the present value of that future lost income is. But sometimes it's not as complicated, and you've just missed 3 months of work, and we have your W-2s, and we have your pay stubs, and we have an obvious gap of where you've missed out on work. But your wage loss is a big piece of how the accident has impacted you. But there's also an emotional impact, and that emotional impact can vary from person to person. But if your back is injured and you can't roughhouse with your toddler anymore, if you're a runner and you can't go for a jog anymore because there's something wrong with your knee after the accident, or cosmetic things. You know, I represented a woman who didn't have a lot in the way of medical bills, but glass lacerated her face in multiple places, and she has scars on her forehead and under her left eye, and she's got to look at that every day for the rest of her life. And so she didn't have a significant amount of medical bills, but the emotional impact of that scarring made a big deal, or was a big deal. And then the other piece of the puzzle is the impact that a serious accident can have on your relationship. If you are married in Missouri, your spouse has the right to also make a claim against the at-fault driver for something called loss of consortium, which is an allegation that, hey, you hurting my spouse has impacted our relationship. We can't go on walks together. We can't go on vacation together. Our intimacy has been impacted. All of those things come into play. And so I hate to give like a really sort of wishy-washy answer, but you don't know what the worth of a case is until you have looked under every stone with respect to the things that I'm talking about. So I'm not one of those people that thinks, oh, you only have $10,000 in medical bills. Well, your case then is only going to be worth $20,000. Like, you can have minimal medical bills and a huge loss of your quality of life. And then similarly, I've represented people who have $40,000 in medical bills, but it was all diagnostic and those tests were all negative and the person looks fine, seems fine. And so their case might not settle for as much as somebody with fewer medical bills. So they're just, to oversimplify it and put it into some kind of formula, I think that's unwise on the part of a lawyer.
Okay. Do you give free consultations?
Always. I'm smiling because I am too available to people sometimes. Like, I was talking to somebody on the phone whose mother was killed in a motorcycle accident a few weeks ago. I was talking to her and her husband at almost 11 o'clock last night. And I've never met those people. I think they're going to hire me, but I've answered a bunch of their questions and may never see them. And so I believe that a lawyer's first job isn't to ask, what's in this for me? Come in and sign on the dotted line before I do anything. I think we have a duty to answer people's questions and educate them, and then let them make a decision about who makes them feel comfortable and empowered as a lawyer. I think forcing somebody to come in and sign a contract before you answer their questions is kind of the opposite of what we as lawyers ought to be doing. Okay,
so can you walk me through or tell the story, obviously without divulging any kind of information that would, breach attorney-client privilege, but can you walk me through a story of an injured person from a car wreck that you've represented?
Sure. Boy, it's hard to pick. It really is hard to pick because they're all kind of floating in my head at once. But I'll try to give you an example of somebody who really probably presents as a more typical case. So a woman was a passenger in a car that was rear-ended at a high rate of speed. She ended up hitting the dashboard and having a split in her head and needing staples in her head. So she was taken to the emergency room. The at-fault driver at the scene didn't have any insurance and was ticketed for having no insurance. And they went probably a month sort of wringing their hands over, oh my gosh, how are we going to pay these medical bills? They didn't have uninsured motorist coverage. So they thought they were essentially out of luck when they called me. And the first thing I did was I found out where the accident happened, what police department was on the scene. And then I called the prosecutor's office in that jurisdiction and found out that the at-fault driver with a lawyer showed up, provided proof of insurance, and got that ticket dismissed. So I had the clerk send me over a copy of the insurance card, and then we were off to the races. I sent a notice of representation to the insurance company and found out what the policy limits were. My client, who went to the ER and had staples put in her head, only had one other doctor's visit, and the staples were taken out and her hair grew back. She looked fine. Everybody thought that was the end of it. But she continued to talk about numbness in her right leg. And it was from the impact of the collision and the way she braced herself on impact. And she just said something was not right. And her doctors just, said, you look fine to me. Your x-ray was negative. Like, I don't know what to tell you. And I suggested that she go to a neurologist and have a nerve conduction study. And that's kind of, it's called an EMG. E as in E and then M as in Mary, G, an EMG. And it determines whether your nerves are working as they should, whether there's a steady stream of communication going all the way down your limb. Well, sure enough, this woman had nerve damage, permanent nerve damage. And once I was able to find that out, I was quickly able to settle the case for policy limits. And the policy limits, I think in that case, were only $50,000. But she got every penny of it. And because I was able to do it in pretty short order with just, a few phone calls and not much in the way of out-of-pocket expenses, I took less than the contingency fee I even agreed to take, which I don't do all the time. I mean, I've got a family to feed and I do good work. But sometimes there are cases where I feel like my job was pretty limited and all I had to do was make a couple of phone calls or send a couple of letters. And I think, why should I take a ton of that person's money? They're the ones that are hurt. But that's a good example of a recent case that I was able to settle. Sometimes you get at the opposite end of the spectrum and you have a denial of liability and you have to file a lawsuit and it's a fight that lasts a year and a half or more. So there is no typical case, really. I mean, they run the extremes for sure.
And I think that, just from my being in the courthouse, I think that it could be several years before you saw a jury or saw a courtroom. Does that seem, just between the discovery and finding out all the information and everything and actually getting something scheduled in court, which a trial, depending on the location, it can be hard to schedule, but it could be a couple years before you actually, if it went that far, got to a jury.
That's true. And the dragging out of a case in the court system isn't the lawyer's fault. It certainly isn't always the lawyer's fault. It can be. But even in cases where I immediately file a lawsuit and we immediately do discovery and depositions, by the time you get to mediation, which is sort of an attempt to settle the case before a trial date, it's not uncommon for 9 months or a year to go by. And some of that is because the process just has inherent delays in it. When you file a lawsuit and serve it, it takes 30 days before you even find out who the lawyer is going to be on the case. And then sometimes that lawyer says, hey, I need more time to file an answer. And then it might be another month before you go in front of a judge and start scheduling things. And then the court schedule impacts when your case is set for trial. And then deadlines are set relative to that trial date. And so it can take a long time. And the thing that I impress upon my clients is this. Everything in life is sort of a balancing act. And there is an emotional price that clients pay for their case dragging out for a long period of time, being questioned repeatedly, put under the microscope, worrying about what's going to happen, and also going to trial and preparing for trial costs money. hiring experts to evaluate my client. The insurance company will hire a doctor to do their own medical examination of my clients in some circumstances. Other experts might be needed. So the litigation expenses increase rapidly. And that hurts my client. My client pays or gets less money out of a settlement if case expenses are high. So I'm constantly evaluating whether it's better to try to get my client a certain sum of money now that makes them whole, that's something they can live with, versus gambling with that money, essentially, and dragging things out for a year, running up case expenses, and not putting them in a significantly better position. I mean, there are cases where the top offer might be $75,000, let's say. And the client is like, well, I'm hurt worse than that. I want $125,000. Well, you could go to trial and get $125,000. But if you win, the other side is going to appeal, and an appeal might take 2 years past your trial date. So all that time, you don't have any money. And the cost of litigating a case, hiring experts, taking all the depositions, doing everything that you have to do to get a case ready the way a trial lawyer like me thinks a case ought to be prepared, that's going to eat up a chunk of the money that you get. And so, yes, you might get a $125,000 verdict, but you might wait years to get that money, and you're going to lose some of that in case expenses. And you might have been better off just taking the $75,000 and realizing that sometimes a bird in the hand is better than anything else. So every case is different. And so when my clients are faced with settle a case for X dollars or go to trial, I actually have a spreadsheet that I show them that shows them, wow, settling your case for X dollars now is as good or better than waiting 2 years to get a little bit more money.
Absolutely. That's a great point. And I just want to say, Jarrett has massive trial experience. When we were both younger, he won an award, the Lon Hawker, which means he was one of the best trial attorneys in the state under a certain age. I don't know if it's under 30 or under 40, but trial dog, he will go to trial. He also does some criminal defense. He will go and he will try the cases. And that, I think, is something when somebody's injured, they want to know that their lawyer goes and tries the cases that need to be tried. He's going to give you all the information. You're the one that's going to end up making the decision. He's going to give you the best information that he has available. But you do want somebody that knows the ins and outs of a courtroom, can connect with the jury. And I think it's really clear during this interview that you're somebody that connects with people. So anyway, that's just kind of an aside. He's a trial guy, so you do want that in your lawyer.
Well, thank you for saying all of that. I'm very proud of that award, but sometimes I realize, wow, that was given to me in the year 2000. That was suddenly a long time ago. But I think being a good trial lawyer has two functions. I mean, if you have to go to trial, it's important to know your way around a courtroom. But I also think that if your opponent, whether it's a claims adjuster or another trial lawyer on the other side, if those people get the sense, wow, this person knows what they're doing, and I might lose or I might have a tough time, that might impact negotiations. And I don't say that, I don't think any lawyer is afraid of any other lawyer in this city. Like, I think that's just a fact. I don't care how good a trial lawyer is. I don't think there's any lawyer on the other side saying, oh no, I don't want to go up against so-and-so. I think that's the stuff, that's a fabrication of lawyer ego. I think that when you're doing the work on a case, if you are sending a message by the quality of your work that you know what needs to be done, you know how to object to things, you know your way around a courtroom, like when you send that message, I think the other side makes settlement decisions based on that, not out of fear, but just out of this sort of unspoken understanding that they're not going to run over me. They're not going to run over my client. If they're going to push with everything they have, they're going to get everything I have. And sometimes just that factor alone helps influence the outcome of a case. But yeah, trials aren't that common in car wreck cases. I don't know what the exact numbers are, but I would guess that less than 10% of all car wreck cases go to trial in Jackson County. And that used to be different, but juries have become more conservative over the last decade, and jury verdicts for cases that don't involve catastrophic injury, like soft tissue injury cases, those verdicts are sometimes shockingly low, and you're better off trying to settle the case.
Right. And any lawyer worth their salt is going to be guiding their client through that process and through that decision-making process. Okay, so this is, when we're talking about accidents, what if the accident is my fault or partly my fault? Should I still contact a lawyer? Should I still come see you? Should I still start getting treated?
I think you should definitely still get treated. I think whether you get a lawyer or not depends upon whether there's any possibility that the other driver was partially at fault. You may have gotten a ticket at the scene, but there may be additional circumstances where you've been injured and you think your injuries are partially caused by the other driver. But if you have insurance and you have caused an accident and it's all your fault, you have to notify your insurance carrier immediately because your insurance contract somewhere in the fine print requires you to do that. And if you do that, then the good news is they take all of the worry out of your hands. They provide you with a lawyer, they provide you with a defense, and you don't have to worry about it. If you don't have insurance, then that opens up a whole other set of problems that are for a different day probably. But if you've caused an accident and you have insurance and you're not hurt, just cooperate fully. Provide everybody with your information, give statements, and let them do their job. I mean, that's what you're paying premiums for. Let them do the worrying and take care of things for you.
Okay. Is there anything that I am not asking that I should have asked that I should have asked, or that you would expect me or a potential client to ask when they come into the office?
I can't, you've been pretty thorough, so I can't really think of anything off the top of my head. The one thing that I see sometimes in people is getting kind of wrapped around the axle with their expectations. There are people who are in a car wreck and they will say, it's been 3 months. Why isn't my case done? And they might still be treating or scheduled for surgery, or they might start thinking about their lawsuit hand in hand with upcoming expenses or Christmas. I mean, I kid you not, like people start getting, they start counting their chickens before they hatch. And that can be just emotionally wrecking to a person. But it also just creates, it creates a lot of internal suffering. And I try to tell my clients, whether they've lost a loved one or whether they're hurt really badly, that they have faith in me and trust the process and understand that my job is to not do it fast, to do it right, and to get them as much as I reasonably can doing things the right way. And that job, that obligation on my part, I have to do that without thinking about what somebody's desires are or expectations are. And I try to do that from the beginning with my clients. I try to say, don't think of this as a lottery win. Don't think about the money. Just take care of you and let me be the lawyer and find a path to recovery for you. And most of the time, that's not an issue. But, you know, when you're in this business, you see all kinds. And by all kinds, I mean, there are some people who come to me who I question how hurt they are, and what they really want to do is they want to have a pending claim that they can use to get one of those lawsuit advance loans that are advertised on daytime TV. And that's just the wrong mindset to have. If you are hurt, take care of yourself, do what your doctors say, keep a thorough assessment of how your life has changed, and everything else will take care of itself with a good lawyer.
I like that. I like that. Is that, just an aside, on lawsuit advancement loans, is that something that if you're represented by an attorney, that the attorney has to sign off on, or can they do that separate from your lawsuit?
Well, I think they are an awful idea. And the reason why they're an awful idea is people spend their settlement before they get it.
Right.
But lawyers ethically cannot be involved in those transactions. I, as a lawyer, don't sign off on anything. I don't take any part in those transactions at all.
Okay. And hopefully warn your clients off of them. I
do. I warn them because if a client takes out a $10,000 loan, one of those companies is going to charge them like a $3,000 processing fee. So they owe $13,000 right out of the gate instead of 10. And the interest rates on some of those loans can be like 48% interest.
Crazy.
And over a year's time, that $13,000 can turn into $25,000. Well, guess what? When your case settles for 50, a lawyer takes his 25% or 33%, and there's not much left. And I think they're just a terrible idea.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, there are circumstances where people lose everything because they're injured. And so I don't pretend to be so high and mighty that I'm judgmental of somebody who makes a decision like that, if it's to keep the lights on, to feed the kids, to keep the house from getting repossessed. But just as a general rule, they're a bad idea.
Right, right. We're going to go a little lighter now. If somebody comes in from out of town, what is the one restaurant in Kansas City you feel like you have to take them to?
You know, I'm not a fan of chains, so I would never recommend a chain. And I would say Joe's Barbecue, Taco Republic, and probably Main Slice Pizza are all really good places to go.
Awesome.
And I'm from Texas, and I am kind of a Texas barbecue snob, but I would say that Joe's is pretty good. But there's more to this city than just barbecue, too.
Definitely, definitely. When somebody comes in from out of town, what's the one thing you want to show them in Kansas City?
You know, I'm a really active person, and I ride my bike a zillion miles a day. I like hiking. There's a lot of nature trails in this area. There are lots of places to be active. That's kind of my thing. But in terms of just showing them something that kind of is the hallmark of what the city has to offer, probably the same as most people. I'd take them to the plaza. I would take them downtown. But I'm kind of more of a burn a few calories and sweat and be in the great outdoors to the greatest extent possible.
Okay, great. All right. So if you want to contact Jarrett, his phone number is on the screen. It'll be in the information below the video as well. Obviously, he's an extremely intelligent, compassionate person, an excellent lawyer. I hope that you will call him if you are injured in a car wreck. He will be honest with you from the start. And I just think that's so important. It's one of the reasons he was one of the first people I wanted to invite on the show, because I trust him so much and I think he's a good lawyer and a good person. So thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thanks, Amy. And not to talk over you, but you are one of the best people I know. You come from such a fantastic family, and you have been grinding it out, helping people for as long as I can remember. And more than just earning a paycheck, like Amy, like cares about the nuts and bolts of our community and is just a nice voice for people who don't have a level playing field. And she does more than I could ever dream of doing. So kudos to Amy.
Yay, yay. All right, so I'm going to stop recording. And first I'm going to say bye. Thank you so much. But I'm going to stop recording, and then I want to chat for a second.
All right, sounds good.